Hey everybody, and welcome back to Honeycomb Manila. My name is Kayo, and today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics in coffee, which is pour over kettles. So we have three kettles that we're going to talk about today. We have the Timemore, we have the Brewista cordless kettle in white in this case, and then we have the Stagg EKG. This is the non-Bluetooth version. Disclosures, these two kettles were purchased by myself for the company, for Honeycomb. We use them day in and day out, and that's why we purchased them, to use them. This one, the Timemore kettle, was actually sent to us by the brand The Second Mile, which is a local coffee company that also distributes the kettle. This one was bought from El Capitan, and this one was bought in Hong Kong and hand-carried from Hazel and Hershey. I bought a ton from them. Now, since the Timemore was sent to us, I do want to have that disclosure in here. It in no way will affect my opinion, or I will try as much as possible. I do think it's important that you know beforehand, though, that that was the case for this, so that you can judge for yourself. That said, no one gets editorial review. No one in any way has a say in what we publish and what we say about any of these kettles or any other products at all that get sent to Honeycomb. Be it for Daily Drink Mag or sent to myself. So yeah, let's get into it. Now, discussing these kettles, we're going to do it in a somewhat scientific way. We're gonna first talk about user interface, which is the shape of the kettle, the nozzle, the handle, the body itself, build quality, and then we're gonna talk about the bases and the user interface on the bases. Because they're all significantly different. They have different approaches to doing what's pretty much the same thing. And then we're gonna do a control test, which is to see which one of these has good control in terms of controlling the flow. And then finally, we're going to do a speed test. So the first thing I wanna discuss is the nozzle shape of the gooseneck kettle. Now this comes in two factors, and that's first the actual shape of this kind of S curve that makes up the gooseneck, and then second is the actual spout through which the water comes through. And you can see on this gooseneck, it has a very hard S shape with no cutback. Now, on a pour over kettle, and this is important, we take all of our pressure from all the way down here at the bottom of the kettle. All of the weight of the water inside this kettle is pushing down to push that little stream out of this top of the nozzle, and that's why we have that gooseneck. Now, the EKG has slightly different a shape, where that line is a little bit straighter. For most intents and purposes, that doesn't really cause any problems or any differences in the kettle itself or the way that it pours. Aesthetically, it's just a little bit different, and maybe there's a little bit of a flow difference, just based on Bernoulli's principle. Now, let's talk about the nozzles themselves, or the tips of the nozzles, and I would want to compare the different shapes of the nozzles. If you put them head to head, you can see that the fish kettle and the Brewista actually have a very similar tip, and that's going to allow for a lot of control when releasing water through there. And then let's compare that to the shape of the Stagg EKG, which is very flat or more parallel to the ground. So you can see here on the EKG, based on the way that this nozzle is shaped, that when you tip it over, what's really happening here is that it's kind of spilling out from a flat surface. So this is a bit more like tipping a cup over and pouring out of a cup. And you can imagine that, okay, when you pour out of a glass, it kind of has a more straight edge. That has a tendency to spill a little bit. And we do experience a little bit of dribble from that as a result. Whereas here on this shape of nozzle on the Brewista, and it's pretty much the same for the Timemore kettle, this one, when you tip it over, the stream of water is coming a little bit more vertically, right? So the cut here you can see is kind of vertical when it's tipped. Whereas here on the Stagg, when you tip it over, it's still kind of at a 45-degree angle. Now let's talk about the handles. On the fish kettle, you kind of had this counter balance control thing where you can put your thumb. I like that a lot. The handle feels a little bit cheap, if I'm honest. Like, They're all plastic, but this is the cheapest plastic of all three. In terms of build quality, it is the cheapest build quality, but it is half the price of all three. So I probably should have said that up front. The price of this is about 4,000 pesos, which is about, what, $80 or 80, 90 US dollars. Whereas the EKG and the Brewista are both in that kind of $190, $200 price range, depending where you are. So taxes and shipping and importing is different, but that's kind of a general idea of how much they cost. 9 to 11,000 peso range, I would say. Now, you do feel that in the build quality. You do feel it a lot. So as I said, the handle on this kettle does feel a little bit cheap, but it does have a very nice control mechanism, which is this thumb grip, so that when you tip it over, there's this kind of counterbalance, allowing you to kind of throttle back and pull back with your thumb. Whereas on the Brewista, you have this kind of curvature, this section of the handle where it's sculpted and curves back, and that kind of sits nicely in the palm of your hand, so that when you're tipping it over, it kind of just sits very comfortably right here in the palm of your hand. EKG, again, you have this little section here where you can put your thumb, and that allows for a bit of throttle control when you're pouring back. Now, something that's unusual about the Stagg EKG and the Stagg line made by Fellow Products is that there's a weight supposedly placed into the handle of this kettle to move some of the center of gravity back towards your hand. And that should allow for a little bit more control when you're doing your pour overs. Capacity. Capacity for this one is rated at 600 ml. Capacity for this one is rated at 600 ml. And capacity for this one is rated at 900 ml. But let's fill them up with water and see what the results are, because I think you'll be a little bit surprised. All right, now I'm going to put as much water as I can up to this little line inside. They all have a line inside, and here you can see this little black line in there, and that's supposed to be the max fill of the kettle. I'm going to fill up to that line. And it looks like we have 881 ml. So pretty close to as advertised. I think we could probably fill this up all the way to 900 ml. As with the Stagg EKG, you also have a line inside there. In this case, it's debossed into the kettle, and it says in there 0.6 L. All right, so at the line, it actually says 650 ml. So the EKG was 20 below, and the Brewista is actually 50 above. All right, and then finally we have the Timemore. The line inside, it's kind of like printed on the inside. It says max and min inside of the kettle. It's 569.7 or 570 ml. All right, so we're off by about 30 ml, which is about 5%. Yeah, 5% of 600 ml. I could probably push this all the way to 600 ml if I needed to, but you know, I don't want to overfill past the max as much as possible. All right, so let's talk now about the interface of the bases of each of these kettles. They all do pretty much the same thing, but I want to go into detail in how each of them work because that does matter to your workflow and for the learning curve of getting to know and use these devices. So first with the fish kettle, it only has one switch over here on the back to turn it on. And once it's on, you see the readout. It has the current temperature, the target temperature, and then the target temperature is adjusted using this little slider panel here. There are two buttons. You have the play button, which heats up your water, and then you have this temperature hold button, which holds the temperature once it's gotten to the desired temperature. If you have your temperature set, let's say you're setting for 95 degrees, when you put your kettle on and you tap that button, it will go to that temperature and hold, and then when you put the kettle back, it'll hold again. Coming over to the Brewista, this was patterned after kind of the original cordless kettle, or the most OG successful cordless kettle maybe, which was the Bonavita. So it has a very similar control interface. You have a timer, so you can press that timer, and if the kettle is off the base, Timer comes on and you can start, stop the timer. I have never used the timer on this base. I don't really see the point of using the timer there if you have a timer on your scale, but if you don't have a timer on your scale, this is a useful feature. So there is also this temperature hold button, and it works very similar to the one over here. There is a plus and minus to adjust your target temperature, and then over here you have the turbo boil and kind of the regular boil, and then you have the Fahrenheit or Celsius toggle button. So it puts all of the buttons up here on the front, and it's a lot. If I'm honest, it's a lot of buttons, and there's quite a learning curve to figuring this out. But once you figured it out and you know what you're doing, it's as easy as putting the kettle on, pressing the button, and then setting your target temperature. So finally, you have the Stagg EKG, and the EKG has just one button over here. Which is, well, that's kind of misleading. It actually has a couple of switches here on the back. One for temperature hold. So you can see when you flip the switch, it says hold on, and you flip it back, it says hold off. And there's another switch over here that's got your Fahrenheit or Celsius. But from experience, once you set those, you're not really toggling back and forth. It's either you like it holding or you don't like it holding. Or you like it in Fahrenheit or you like it in Celsius. There's no other reason other than the first time you set this up to keep on going back and toggling those switches. So I think it's a good idea for them not to have put it on the front of the device. Instead, you just have this one very convenient jog dial, and you can set the temperature by flicking it back and forth this way. And that's it. As long as the kettle's on the surface, it's going to start boiling to that temperature. The EKG also has a timer. You just hold down the button and it starts counting down 3, 2, 1, and then it starts counting up from there. So that's an interesting feature. I never use it, but it's there if you need to use it. For the base, which one do I prefer of the three? I gotta say that my favorite between the Timemore, the Brewista, and the Stagg EKG would have to be the Stagg EKG. That single jog dial format is just so convenient. Once you've set up your kettle, you're almost always using it in the same fashion. And from a workflow point of view, that's what you want. That, okay, I know that every time I put this kettle down, it's gonna go back to temperature as long as that hold switch is on. For these guys, there's some fiddling, right? You have to check a setting, see if the light's on. Over here on the Brewista, you have to check that the red light's on. So it takes that extra step or remembering to do that. And anyone who's worked in a cafe before will definitely, can definitely think of an experience where they put the kettle down, they thought it was boiling, but it just wasn't. And I find that temperature hold system of putting the kettle back on the EKG base and it going back to temperature every single time is a definite pro and a game changer, and that's something I wish every kettle did. Alright, so what we're going to do now is I put 300 ml into this kettle and move those guys to the side. We're going to put 300 ml in each of these kettles and see how well they perform or how consistently we can pour. And I'm going to try to pour as slowly as possible but also as consistently as possible. And we see over here on the Brewmaster app from Akaya how well, or it'll chart for us how consistent that pour is. I'm going to use the same pouring technique, which is to have 2 points of contact on the kettle. Let's go for it. So what I'm trying to do is pour it with a steady stream without it turning to droplets. That's getting a bit harder to do. So with the EKG, we had a total weight of 300 grams or 300 ml, total pouring time of 2 minutes 55 seconds, and an average flow rate of 1.8 grams per second. Now, with the Stagg EKG, when you get below a certain point in a kettle's capacity, or basically below this line, the pressure pushing down to get the liquid out of the nozzle kind of goes away. I only noticed that happening on this kettle right at the very end. As you can see, there's a very consistent rise on this chart showing how consistently the flow was. And you can see this is the flow measured kind of in real time. And it's relatively consistent. You can see the spots where I start to get a little bit of dribbling. But generally speaking, it was fine right until here in the very end where I had to dump out the remaining water that was inside. So you only lose control back at kind of that very end of your brew. That's the last 15 ml of water inside the kettle. In theory, your kettle should never get that low. So yeah, I would give this an A in terms of control. With the Brewista, we had a relatively consistent pattern here as well. There was a moment over here at around 160 ml where the kettle wasn't perfectly straight this way. It wasn't perfectly straight this way. It had a bit of an angle. And I only noticed it at that point. And when I straightened it out, it created this big burst of liquid coming out at this point. So that's a little bit of human error. But you can see in general that the gradation of the pour is relatively consistent throughout the rest of the pouring that we did. Except for here at the end where you had that same point where it runs out of pressure and dumps all the water out at the 290 mark or 285 mark. And then I had to dump out water and then dump out water again so that we could get to our final weight of 300. Total weight was 302 grams. Total time was 3 minutes 34, and the average flow rate was 1.4 grams per second. So I think that that's significant. It is a significant jump in control between these two. All right, so with the Timemore fish kettle, total weight 301 grams, total time 2 minutes 44 for an average flow rate of 1.9 grams per second. So this is the fastest of all the three kettles. However, you can see here on the graph, there's a significant step up over here at the last 100 grams or 100 ml of water that we put in. And I was really struggling to get the flow rate consistent at that point. And I think that this is actually a design flaw with this kettle that earlier when I was talking about the pressure changing when the water level is too low, it happens very early in this kettle. And I think that has to do with the total circumference of the kettle, it having a smaller body. Whereas with the Brewista, because the circumference is bigger, and as well with the EKG, because the circumference is bigger, I think that translates to the amount of pressure going through the spout. I'm not sure, but that's my experience. It's harder to control this kettle when you have 100 ml or less of water inside of it. And then here at the end, the last 30 grams. So if you remember with the Stagg EKG, it was about 5 ml or grams. And then with the Brewista, it was about 10-15 ml, I think, of water, the remaining. Here, I was struggling as early as 100 grams or 100 ml of water remaining in the kettle. And I see that as an issue and as a problem. And that has nothing to do with the control interface, but with the amount of liquid that's left inside of the kettle nearing that end of the pour period. So I think that's a little bit problematic, and I would say that's something you should be cautious of when purchasing this kettle, and definitely a con of the Timemore fish kettle. If you dump all that water late in your pour over, say for a V60, you're gonna upset the flow of water inside of your cone. And it's just going to be something that you're not going to be able to control. You're not going to have a choice over. For the first 200 ml, it actually performs very similar to the Brewista. And you can attribute that to the shape of the spout being similar. But in terms of that last 100 ml, it had to jump significantly, maybe 30-40% less control in order to catch up all the way to the flow rate of the EKG. So it's not very consistent in that aspect. All right, so we come to the speed test section of our review. We've set the temperatures for all of our kettles to 95 degrees. All of the water came from the same source at 33 degrees, which is slightly above room temperature. We're gonna press all these buttons at the same time and see which one gets up to temperature the fastest. So in our tests, we found that the EKG is the fastest, significantly faster than the other two. If you ask me to choose, I would say that there are different reasons to choose each of these. Now, it cannot be overstated that this is only 4,000 pesos. But my experience with the fish kettle is pros, price. It's 4,000 pesos. Though that's a definite pro. It has a lot of control when it's full. It's very much readily available. It's easy to get here in Manila, here in the Philippines. And I gotta say that that's a pro as well. Cons, build quality. You really feel that it's half the price. Like the quality of the machining and the materials that were used, this top feels really cheap. It doesn't look premium. I would say like the copper is a nice touch here, but that's about it. It just is not like a premium device, and you're not paying a premium for it. So I guess you get what you pay for in this situation. If this is all you can afford, by all means, go for it. It's a great place to start, especially if you're making 1 to 1.5 cups of water. Why? Well, you need to account about 80 to 100 ml of water to your what would you call that? Your washing of the filter and preheating your entire pour over system. And then another 100 ml just gets lost to no control at the end of the pour. So you're losing about 180 to 100 ml here. And as we saw, it got to 580 ml of water in there, 570 ml. So you really only have about 400 ml of water to work with. Now, if you're doing a pour over that's say 360 ml of water, 24 grams of coffee, then sure, that'll make you 2 cups of coffee, maybe even a bit more. But it's kind of restricting in that aspect that you can only reliably make a certain amount of coffee in there. And I would say for me, when I do a pour over, my starting point is 15 grams of coffee to about 225 ml of water. And with that formula, with that ratio, I can't really make 2 cups of coffee using this kettle. And that's a major con, major drawback. But again, at the price, you could in theory buy 2 kettles. And that might even prolong the life of both of them, being able to alternate between the two. With the Brewista, it has quickly become my go-to kettle. Of the 3, it's the one that I've used the longest, in other people's kettles. In terms of owning it, this is the latest one that I've owned. And we have had all 3 on our pantry bar for the last maybe 2 months. And I found that the one that I go to the most is the Brewista. So I think that speaks a lot for it. That receiver over here on the handle is a game changer. I can't think of any other kettles that have designed the handle so thoughtfully that becomes one of the most important features of the kettle. Those are the pros. The cons are the user interface is kind of terrible. I was mentioning the Bonavita kettle before, and it uses a very similar interface to the Bonavita with lots of buttons. And it kind of baffles me that they designed this kettle so many years after the Bonavita and still made all of the same mistakes, or what I would think are mistakes. The build quality feels really nice. That's a pro. A major con for me, and one of the reasons it took me so long to buy one of these for myself, is that logo. I really hate the Brewista logo. And the fact that they put it so prominently on the front of the device, I think that it's just off balance. Like the size of it, its location on the kettle, and the logo itself I don't like. I don't like the word mark. I probably would tolerate if it was just the little picture of the kettle, but with the word mark, I just don't like it. It's also over here on the front of the base, big Brewista, high contrast, black on white, and I don't like it. I just don't like it. Another nitpicky thing is that there's this thing over here that says SUS 304, also debossed into this part of the kettle. I don't know what it means. I don't know why it's there, and I don't like it. Now, just above that, you have the debossed 0.6L, and that's debossed so that you can read it from inside the kettle, which makes sense because you pour water inside and you're looking at the water level from inside the kettle. But this one is readable from the outside, and this one is readable from the inside. And that flip of the text of the font, it kind of bugs me out. So I don't like that. So I mean, I'm not trying very hard to find things I don't like. It's just something that every time I pick this up, I see it, and they were so close. Finally, the pros for the EKG, for the Stagg EKG, is user interface, 100%. The base is the best base of the three. The control mechanism is just so intuitive, and the fact that you never have to think about pressing that button once you put it on, I think it's a game changer. And if you ask me which I thought was the best of the three kettles, I would probably give it to this one because of its speed and that intuitive, it goes back to temperature when you put it back. The one that I would be fastest to buy would be this one for sure. Where it gets murky is that I just told you that when I have all three on bar, this is the one I grab. If I want more control, this is the one I grab. I would probably say that for the cafe, I would 100% go with the Stagg EKG. For a cafe, this is also a good choice. There is no situation where I would recommend the Timemore for a cafe, and it's not built for that. So yeah, do not get the Timemore for a cafe. For home, 100% go with the Brewista. As I said, when I'm brewing my own coffee and I have all three here at our pantry, this is the one that I go for. It's the one that's most comfortable to use. It's the one that I think is best for experimentation. For that reason, I think that this kettle is just slightly ahead of the EKG. And this one's my pick. All right, do you own any of these kettles? Which one do you own? Which one do you like? Do you have any questions? Are you in the market for a kettle? Go ahead and ask your questions in the comment section below, and we'll be sure to reply to them as much as possible. You can also follow along on Instagram. My name is @Kayo Cosio on Instagram. Follow @DailyDrinkMag on Instagram, and follow @Honeycomb Manila. Also visit our website. It's www.dailydrinkmag.com, where we blog about all of this stuff that we cover. Finally, do subscribe to our page. If you did enjoy this video, click the thumbs up button and click on the subscribe button. There should be one around here, right around now. And then watch another one of our videos. We have stuff about coffee, and we have stuff about streetwear and sneakers. And yeah, I wish you guys good luck. I wish you guys good health. I wish you guys great coffee. Peace.